Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Heidi, and on today's episode, we are talking about some amazing stories. We will be talking about the Netflix film, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and also the Netflix short documentary, Long Shot. Yes, documentaries are coming back. I love documentaries, so you guys kind of can't escape them. Also, what's interesting about these is they're both on Netflix. You can stream them both now. Also, they are both films that portray these wonderful stories. One of them, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, is almost literally told to make you believe that it is a book that has been written, and they're telling you the stories from this book. And then Long Shot is such a wonderful story. I mean, you can't really make a documentary off of a boring story. But it is so good. Even if I just read this in a newspaper, I would still be intrigued. And then in a documentary, I love that form of storytelling because you get to see so much more. You get to see the story unfold. You get to hear about the events that happened. And you get to see how a director is going to tell you a situation that could just be told to you in the news, but how they're going to entertain you in a way and also inform you. So I'm going to just say that the connectors, that these two films are about good stories. Also, they're both on Netflix, so if you'd like to watch them right after listening to this, you can. We are going to start about talking about The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. This is directed by the Coen brothers, Ethan and Joel. It was also written by them, but there are some stories in this movie that are based on other stories by other writers. There is a story in here called All Gold Canyon, which is based on a story by Jack London. There's also a segment in here called The Gal Who Got Rattled, which is inspired by a story by Stuart Edward White. And then also, very important in this film is the cast, because let me tell you, this cast is amazing. This would not be half as good without the acting. I mean, obviously the Coen brothers are great directors and great writers. Also, just to put it out there, I like the Coen brothers, so I am already fans of them. That helps me like this movie. I know some people don't like them and don't like their work. But anyway, just to put it out there, I really like their work. But even with their writing, their directing, all their creative work, the cinematography, the musical score, all of those things are great elements. But this film would not be complete without the wonderful cast. So to start, Tim Blake Nelson plays the title character, Buster Scruggs. You also have James Franco playing a cowboy. You also have Stephen Root as a bank teller. You will know him from the film Office Space, the guy who loves his stapler. He is wonderful in this film. Also, Liam Neeson as an impresario. You also have Harry Melling, as an artist. Tom Waits plays a prospector. He is so good. I knew Tom Waits was in this film, and I did not really recognize him. He disappeared into this role. Although probably some people already think of Tom Waits as like a prospector / cowboy, which he is kind of. But he really disappeared into this role and was spectacular. You also have Bill Heck as Billy Knapp, who is wonderful in this film. You also have Zoe Kazan as Alice Longabow, who is spectacular. I could be that she's like really one of the very few women in this movie that has a big like speaking part, so maybe that's why she stood out to me, but she is so good in this. Really, I was very impressed. You also have John Joe O'Neill, who plays an Englishman, Brendan Gleeson, who plays an Irishman. You have Saul Rubinek, who plays a Frenchman. Wow, that's a lot. Englishman, an Irishman, and a Frenchman. Sounds like a bad joke. You also have Tyne Daly, who plays a very posh, very persnickety woman, you could say. And then you have Chelsea Ross, who plays an animal trapper. The cast is wonderful. Even if you don't recognize all these actors' names, you will want to look them up after this film, just as I did, and then just go through their filmography. They're spectacular. I was so impressed. The things that you should know about this film, basically, this film is 6 tales portraying life and violence in the Old West, a lot of violence. It follows a singing gunslinger, a bank robber, a traveling impresario, an elderly prospector, a wagon train, and a pair of bounty hunters on a very awkward carriage ride. All these stories are sad. Some of them, I would say they're funny, some funnier than others. I mean, that depends on how dark your sense of humor is. And all of them are very bizarre. If you want something that ties these stories together, it's really how kind of bizarre they are in a very Coen Brothers way. Also, this film is slightly musical. I wouldn't call it a musical, but it does have music in it. And not just like background music, but characters sing in it. Again, I think it's slightly funny, but it's also very dark, very quirky. And about the musical part, it's really, to sum it up, it's a musical that I like. And I don't like a lot of musicals. Probably, in my opinion, because they don't sing too much. It's not like you're waiting every 2 minutes for them to start a song. Also, I feel the songs blend really well into the story, as opposed to just having a break in the film for a big musical number. No one's stopping to break out and start singing and dancing. I feel like the songs really blend well into the story and progress the narrative along. Also, I'm not a super big fan of Westworld. I have not seen that much of it, but I watched this and I was like, this is just what I want Westworld to be. I mean, I'm sure they're very different, but that's just how I felt. Also, I would say it gets darker as the movie goes on. That is definitely something I observed. At first, I was really laughing a lot, and then in the middle, I was crying and laughing, and then at the end, I was scared and laughing and still sort of crying. So maybe at that point, it's just sniffles. But it is definitely a good mix of tales. A few of my takeaways from this. This is through and through a Coen Brothers film. It has their quirky dialogue and just so many parts about it that are quintessential them. There are times when it feels stressful and very weird, again, like the Coen Brothers do, and there is just this casual dispensing of blood and strange ways to die, which is also, again, so Coen Brothers. Things just happen and suddenly someone's dead. The format, because it's storytelling where there are multiple stories, it didn't stress me out too much because there were bizarrely funny moments, but also because these little stories are they're short vignettes, so it's easier to watch because I don't feel like I have to go through this long 2-hour thing of build up of when someone is going to die. I wrote that it was chilling and pleasing, which makes me sound like a serial killer, but that is how I felt. Also, because they're short, I would say there is this quick, unexpected way people die. Again, which is sort of it is the Coen Brothers style, but it's amplified in my opinion because there are these short vignettes, and basically everyone, there's always someone who dies in each of these stories, sort of in all of them, but it's so short that it happens so quickly, even though the Coen Brothers surprisingly like they'll like kill someone in a surprising way. Like you won't be expecting it. You'll have suspense, but then they die and you may not have seen it. Just happens around the corner. And that was definitely apparent in this film. But because they were short stories, it was still easier to watch for me, even though the deaths are pretty unexpected at times. Sometimes they're coming, but in other ways they occur not in ways you would expect. Also, as a personal note, this film reminds me of what made me interested in films in the first place. I really enjoy movies and films. Hence why I like talking about them. But ever since I was little, I've always enjoyed watching them. And the way this movie told its story and just the whole way it was produced and how it looked and everything, the writing and the cinematography and everything about it, reminded me of why I enjoy films so much. There are so many surprises that this film dispenses. Again, I love and hate surprises because it makes me really stressed and anxious. But again, it was on Netflix, so watching it at home was a little bit easier than going to a theater. But also, I just admire their cinematography. There's so much like the sunset on a wagon train, or a quick inside camera view, where the angle is coming from inside a guitar. Just the cinematography is amazing. I love the strange, quirky characters. Just the dialogue that's spoken, it's comforting. To me, sometimes when words are so well written and so well put together, it feels almost comforting and soothing to hear it being read to me, or in this instance, it being spoken and as a dialogue. It was so comforting, like a blanket that you could just get wrapped up in, but then at the same time, sometimes lost and confused in, because they're talking about things of the West that I don't really know. They're giving me facts about how a wagon train works and I don't know. Or you have Stephen Root, who again plays a bank teller who speaks so fast you have to really pay attention to tell what he's saying. But again, overall, it felt almost comforting to hear how well just their dialogue was written. And I really appreciated that. And again, these are all elements that really remind me of why I became interested in film in the first place. So that was very thrilling to me, and very enjoyable. Before we continue talking about this film, we're going to take a quick break, but we will be right back.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. We are continuing to talk about the Coen Brothers film, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. I would also like to continue mentioning, I feel like I keep saying quirky about this film and about the Coen Brothers, but it is so true. The Coen Brothers are so quirky and almost divisive at times in their storytelling. It reminds me a bit of Quentin Tarantino, just the continual bloodletting, or also Tim Burton in the quirkiness. But in my opinion, I think the Coen Brothers are better. I don't know if, maybe there's a team or something. But I like their work a little bit more than the two previously mentioned directors. But it did remind me a bit of that. But it's super enjoyable for me, even though there were times when I was like, oh God, no. Or something's coming, but it's the Coen Brothers, so you don't know how it's going to happen. But I enjoyed that. Also, I will say the Coen Brothers rely pretty heavily on this storybook tool. And it's what ties all the tales together. The film opens where you literally see a storybook and you're led to believe that all of these tales that are being told to you are from this book, and you see the pages turning, and you see different things dedicated to, and you see the table of contents, and then the story starts as it goes on to its first tale, which is about Buster Scruggs. and just they keep coming back to this vehicle to move it forward with this page turning, literally. And it's interesting. I feel like in a way they maybe rely a bit too heavy on this to lace the individual stories together. But it's interesting. I found it enjoyable, but also like, I don't know, not jarring from the narrative, but it was intriguing. They rely on it, again, as I said, pretty heavily. Just like, if it's even a complaint, I would say that's a minor complaint. Also, to speak, I don't want to give away too much about these stories because they're short, so I don't want to like reveal too much. And again, you just get so many unexpected things, just the ways that people are dispatched, that I don't want to give too much away. So it's hard for me to like tell you all this, but if I had to pick some of my favorite vignettes, favorite of the stories, one that stood out to me, maybe because I feel like these stand out to me because they're so sad, which is, I don't know if maybe I shouldn't say these are my favorites. Maybe my favorite is the first one about Buster Scruggs, which is so good. The use of song in that is like, I just wish all musicals were like that. And Tim Blake Nelson is amazing. I had a conversation with my mom where we just like gushed about how great he was in this and how much we love him. But he did so well in that. Maybe that is my favorite. I laughed the entire time that story was playing. Oh, but to paint a picture, I laughed the whole time that was playing. And while I was laughing, my roommate was curled up on the couch like, this is so weird. I don't like this. This is so weird. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so weird. I love it. But again, I like the Coen Brothers. So if you don't, then this will probably not be your cup of tea because it is very Coen Brothers-y. As again, I liked that story. I liked Buster Scruggs. Another one that I like is Meal Ticket. And again, this probably sent out to me because it is so sad. And this is about an orator and sort of like the man who takes him around to different towns to use his orating talent to just get money. He's like, it's called Meal Ticket because it's about getting money from this man using his orating abilities, and because he's using him in a way too because this man doesn't have any limbs. He doesn't have any legs or arms. So classic Coen Brothers twist. So he's using this traveling, I don't know what the right word is for him, impresario, played by Liam Neeson, is using this man as an orator to get money off of the people to come see shows, to come to this man perform. And it's really like a commentary, I felt like, on show business and like this highbrow artist in a way, this orator who maybe doesn't have any arms or limbs but is a great speaker. He's almost like discarded for this like other act that, you know, appeals to just the mob more, this like lowbrow type of entertainment. Also, a fun fact, the man who plays the orator, or like the artist, he is played by the guy who plays Dudley in Harry Potter, which I did not know. So that was interesting. I did not recognize him at all. I mean, not just because he didn't have limbs. I just did not recognize him because he'd really grown, obviously. And he was so good in this film. He like barely talks outside of his like orating, but he's so good. I was very impressed. Another story that is maybe just the most tragic is The Gal Who Got Rattled. This is inspired by a story by Stuart Edward White. And this story, like, it suggests hope, and there's like a form of romance, but then it's just so quickly snatched away, and you like, I almost felt like cheated, but also like impressed by how well they played me. Really, the Coen Brothers are not messing around in this film. Like, blows come fast. Also, James Franco has a great line in this film, and it's just like the end of his story made me laugh and gasp and cry all at the same time. But the end of his little vignette is so great. Again, I would say if you like the Coen Brothers, you will like this film. If you don't like the Coen Brothers, you might not like it. But even if you don't like them, maybe give it a try. If you like Western related things, or it is a really good, the narratives are very good. Also, as a note, this movie does not care about being PC because it is, after all, a 1873 Western storybook, again, as they go on this book motif where you're supposed to be going through these individual stories from a literal book. But yeah, since it's like based off of that, like, an old Western book, they don't care about diversity. So if you think you're going to be triggered or just not enjoy a story that has a real lack of a diverse cast, this will not be for you. If you want more information about Native Americans in the Wild West, this will not provide it for you. It's a very male-dominated cast. It's basically it's an entirely white cast. I mean, there are like glimpses of supposed Native Americans, but like they don't say anything. So yeah, again, if you're here for diversity, I would say this film is not for you. So I am excited to move on to our next film, which is The Long Shot. And this is also on Netflix. This is a documentary. And again, I love documentaries. This is also a short documentary, which, as I mentioned in a previous movie podcast episode, I have realized that Netflix does these short documentaries, and I've been loving them because I love documentaries. So this is like a way to get my like fix in quickly, and I really enjoyed it. This, again, is a great story. And I mentioned before the short documentary Zion. This one is a little bit longer. This film is 40 minutes. It is directed by Jacob La Mendola, and it was also nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Short Documentary. I believe it showed at Sundance briefly. It is very good, and it's based off, obviously, a true story, but the story is so good it almost seems like fiction. So this story came to be when an NYU film graduate, who's the director, Jacob La Mendola, he visited the Curb Your Enthusiasm trivia page on IMDb, just like in like 2012, like a lazy day, and he just wanted to find some, random facts, and he, just was like looking around, reading about the episodes, but the top entry on this trivia page explained that outtakes from the Carpool Lane, which is a episode from season 4, in which Larry David invades traffic by inviting a prostitute to a Dodgers game, you find out that exonerated a murder suspect. So even by knowing that, like I had read a little bit about the story before watching it, it was still riveting to me. And this story, like that Jacob La Mendola came across, it becomes the premise for his documentary, which tells a little more detail about this story. It becomes The Long Shot, and it took Jacob 5 years to make this 40-minute documentary. About its creation, he's quoted saying, "I knew that it was worth taking a long time to tell it correctly," and I really feel like he did. He didn't, have a bunch of funds. He had to take it slow. To get all of his information. He had to work really hard, apparently, to get in contact with Larry David, which is not surprising. But I think he did a really good job. I was very impressed. And then this film is about Juan Catalan, who is arrested for the murder of Martha Puebla, who is a witness and testified against an LA gang. And Juan insists he didn't commit this crime, and his lawyer then builds his case for innocence around footage from Curb Your Enthusiasm, amongst other key video sources. It is a great story. I was so impressed. Again, also you just see all of these pieces come together, just involving Juan's case, and you get to see the way that a hardworking lawyer kind of puts a case together. So that was very interesting, especially because I also was watching films about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So just to see, like, I felt like I learned so much about the law as a very sideline presence. Not that I could at all quote you anything about how the law works. But it was really interesting to read about, or to watch and to see how that works. So before we finish up talking about this film, we're going to take another break, and then we will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. We are continuing to talk about the film Long Shot, a Netflix short documentary. Before the break, I spoke briefly about the plot. And really, I want to say, if someone asked, would you remember a day from a year ago? Like, could you tell them where you were that day, what you did? Like, if someone said, where were you at 10 p.m., would you be able to remember? I don't think I would, unless it was like my birthday or something. But this film, you really get to see, like, at least for me, I watched this and I was like, I should remember more things. Because if someone came to me and accused me of murder, I don't think I could tell them where I was on a certain day if they just threw a date at me. Also, related to that, if you like the storytelling of like Serial, the NPR podcast, you will like this film. It's very much heavy into like the criminal crime drama. So I enjoy that aspect. I do like Serial. So this was intriguing to me. It has to do with crime, but also the justice system a little bit and how lawyers work. So I enjoyed that. As I mentioned, the storytelling is really well done in this film. There's this like back and forth editing, like cutting between the telling of Martha's story and her killing, and then also the telling of the Dodgers game that Juan attended, which is his alibi. They work to build suspense in this like non-narrative film. And typically I feel that more traditional narrative like fiction films do suspense building the best, but their editing tactic in this documentary worked very well to build suspense. And I guess to make me like really riveted in the story. They did that very well, comparable to a fiction like drama or thriller, I would say. Maybe not a thriller, but comparatively to a drama. Also, this is just such a good story on its own that, again, I'd be really interested. But then seeing this documentary, you know, they tell it chronologically and you get to see some good like court footage and many interviews. And I think you get some nice surprises along the way as well. So that was very enjoyable, even if you had read a newspaper article about it before. Also, I felt very involved in the circumstances of I guess the subject of this film, which is Juan. And I did not in a million years think that this crime story about this young man would involve Larry David, but I was proven wrong. So I really enjoyed, like, when he came on screen, I was like, how does he connect? And then as they explained it, you just get to see what they're talking about, and it was very moving. Also, they interview Larry David, and he just describes the story as like pretty cool, like, which is a huge understatement to this story. So I have such a like Larry David thing to say. He also mentioned that, you know, sometimes Larry David will bring up this story at parties or something, and I'm like, oh, this is just your party story. Like, this is a crime story about some guy like being accused of murder. Like, yeah, of course, Larry David, just a party story. How my show saved this man's life. Oh my gosh. There is a scene that I feel like really helps Juan's case. And when you see this one particular piece of footage, it almost like brought me to tears because they've built this suspense really well, and they've made me care about Juan because he's very likable. And they've built all this suspense up that when I see this piece of footage, I almost was like moved to tears because I was relieved and I was like amazed that it had happened, and just the circumstances that brought up this particular footage situation and what it meant for Juan. It was very touching, which again then made me think about Larry David just said oh, it's pretty cool. Gosh, it's really cool. And another tearjerker for me, again, this is only 40 minutes, but it was touching. There's just this goodbye between Juan and his lawyer who worked so hard to free him, and it was very touching. And at the very end, Juan even like says that he just wants a Coca-Cola when he gets out of jail. Like, that's a perfect cola like advertisement. Like, it could be an advertisement for like Curb Your Enthusiasm and an advertisement for Coca-Cola all at the same time. Another point I would say is you get to see the justice system and also the injustice that it can dispense. Just like the admissions of wrong from the police and investigators, and how long cases take in court, and how someone can just languish in this system. It was, I mean, I've listened to Serial where they talk about the justice system, so it wasn't a huge surprise, but it is moving. It definitely stuck with me. I feel like these things are making me more jaded about our government over time, but we'll see. Also, like, along with the fact that you get to see like this justice system play out, and you get to see Juan just like languish within the system, it's like extraordinary. This story is extraordinary, not just because, you know, it involves Larry David or whatever, but because you see Juan, he gets out of jail. Spoiler alert, I'm sorry. But you see his lawyer, who he has a good lawyer. He's not like the court appointed lawyer. He has a good lawyer who works hard and works to save him. And I feel like that in a way also makes this story so extraordinary, is the justice system, like, he gets out of it. He doesn't get caught. You know, someone who is poorer, he works at like a machine shop. He didn't go to college at the time of this film. He's young. He's like an unmarried father. Like, all these things that would go against him in the American justice system, you see him actually be freed. And I feel like that makes it extraordinary, not just because of the circumstances, but because he makes it out. And I mean, just so that you else can hear how cynical I am, but that definitely stuck with me, again, especially after listening to Serial. Also, there's like some nice interviews with a lot of people who were involved in Juan's story. Like, at the end, I felt like they dwelled maybe a little bit too long on like everyone's closing statements. Like, all the interviewees basically had some like philosophical way to close it out, and they all said pretty good things, but I feel like maybe they didn't have to do so many of their closing ideas. I felt like that stretched it out a bit. And I mean, they just had a really good title for the long shot, you know? Like, the cameras that catch this footage are filming from a long shot, and Juan's chances of freedom and being exonerated is a long shot. So, needless to say, The Long Shot is a great film. If you like documentaries, you will love this film. And even if you don't like documentaries, it's only 40 minutes, and I would still highly suggest it. It'll make you very interested in the case, and it might even make you want to watch Curb Your Enthusiasm. So that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you will tune in to the next Movies Podcast episode.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.